Many of you have probably heard about positive psychology, which is really one way to think about not only the substance of this class, but how this science of happiness got off the ground. And here we should really cite the very influential work of people like Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson and others who really got us, the scientific field, interested in what is happiness. Now, when you just think about it from a scientific perspective, let me just sort of start us off. Just think about this, right? 15 years ago, we had hundreds of studies of anger, but we had no studies of gratitude. We had thousands of studies of fear and anxiety, right? Very important to study. We had no systematic scientific studies of compassion. We knew a lot about what makes couples divorce, but we didn't know as much about what makes couples happy. We knew a lot about psychological predictors of disease and the decay of the body from stress to cortisol and the like. We didn't really know much about kind of robust physical health. Those are just basic scientific questions about human nature that this new movement that we're going to cover in this class has really gotten to. Another way to think about this emergence of the science of happiness is that, we have learned a lot as a discipline in scientific psychology about how do you get people from, say, a -5 on some hypothetical scale, where they're feeling depressed or they're suffering anxiety disorder, or they're feeling disconnected or lonely. How can you lift them up so that they're functioning adaptively and you get them to a +1? That's a very important achievement of psychological science. And what we're going to cover in this class is a complementary question, which is how do you lift yourself up from, say, a +5 or 6 on a 10-point scale to a +8, where you're feeling happier and better adjusted in life. So let's clarify this conceptual domain before we dive into some scientific approaches. When I say I'm happy, I'm using a word, right? And what Danny Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner, has really helped us is to clarify our thinking about what do I really refer to when I use the word happiness. So Kahneman suggests 4 different levels of analysis, and we're going to be returning to these in different parts of the class. One is, at the most general level, when I say I'm happy, I'm telling you what my well-being is, how my life is going, right? Overall, my life's going pretty well. When I say I'm happy, second thing is I could be referring to a trait that, I'm just a kind of an enthusiastic person, or I have a particular genetic profile that makes me happy, right? When I say I'm happy, I could be referring to a specific emotion that I'm feeling in the moment. So I might be thinking about, I feel reverence and gratitude right now. And then finally, Kahneman suggests we could be referring to a sensation, kind of a sensory experience. So if I say I'm happy to somebody's query, I might be really saying that, this sun at this moment in time really feels good on my skin. That's a really different kind of experience. So really in this class, we're going to be focusing on that global level of life satisfaction and then the different emotions that get us to happiness. So that's how Danny Kahneman thinks about this conceptual domain of happiness. This perspective has really shaped the field. So, for example, Ed Diener, who's one of the leading scientists in the study of happiness, thinks of happiness as, first of all, your overall well-being. So you might say how satisfied you are with your life. And then the array of positive emotions you're regularly feeling. And he thinks of those 2 things as happiness or your subjective well-being. Later, we'll talk about how you measure this from this perspective, but now we're going to turn to the different scientific approaches to studying happiness. And they're really different traditions that we're going to be kind of touching upon in this class. Some studies, what we might call observational experience sampling studies, will just capture people in the moment, in their daily lives, right? Like, how happy are you feeling right now when you're doing the dishes or at work? Some studies we call cross-sectional studies or correlational studies, and these are just survey studies, where we survey people at one moment in time, right? Say, you fill out a survey, you answer a bunch of questions as you're doing in this class, and then we look at correlations between variables to find out, do more grateful people tend to feel more happy? A third kind of study, a little bit more ambitious, is the longitudinal study where we study people's lives over time. And we try to get a sense of what is the trajectory of a happy life. Where does it go? What are some of its predictors over time? And then finally, of course, this being science, we do experiments. And experiments are really important because we're going to be comparing really specific emotions, say compassion versus another kind of emotion, to look at the effects of that emotion, controlling for every other variable. And that allows us to pinpoint causal relationships between, say, a positive emotional state or a feeling of happiness and a desired outcome. Many different traditions. One of the most essential questions in a class on the science of happiness is measurement, right? Which is, how do I measure how happy you are? How do I measure how happy somebody is in different parts of the world? And what the field has converged upon is really kind of a self-report approach where we simply ask people, how satisfied are you with your life? This is really an approach that's been pioneered by Ed Diener at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. It's one of the most widely used measures of your happiness, and it really kind of boils down to a couple of key components. One is this sort of global sense of your well-being that we talked about. How satisfied are you with your life? And then a second piece to this is, on a daily basis, what kind of positive emotions and negative emotions are you feeling? And those two facets really give us a very important readout of how happy you are at this moment in time. Now, you might think that that's a little superficial, or it doesn't really capture anything significant. But what you're going to see in this class is hundreds of studies showing that sense of how happy you are in your life tells us about your life expectancy, how well you're doing at work, how creative you are. There are a lot of important consequences to this measure of happiness. And our challenge in the class is really to figure out what are the different pathways to feeling happy as Ed Diener measures it. Now, just to give you sort of a full view of how we might measure happiness, another way to go is something pioneered by Matt Killingsworth, who you'll hear about in this class, got his PhD at Harvard. And what he does is an experience sampling approach, which is he beeps people on their smartphones, he has them fill out how happy they are at that moment, what they're doing, and relates it to their happiness. And that gives us a feeling of kind of in the moment, what is your experience of happiness? Of course, you might think about measuring behavioral indicators of your happiness, right? Your happiness really registers in your body, in the orbicularis oculi muscle that surrounds your eyes, as an indicator of your well-being and happiness. So we might look to the sort of measures of expressive behavior. Very useful, for example, if you want to study the happiness of infants or children. You're going to be hearing a lot about the neurophysiological underpinnings of happiness, that they're actually crafted by evolution, different structures in your brain and in your peripheral nervous system, things like the dopamine network in the ventral striatum, parts of your frontal lobes, the vagus nerve, which you'll hear about, which again are another way to look at how well you're doing, how happy you are in life, but which would be looking at a different level of analysis. I hope you're getting a feel that happiness really has different domains and many different nuances, and part of your challenge in this class is to kind of find the paths to happiness that really make the most sense for you. And here at the Greater Good Science Center, for the past 12 or 13 years, we've been tracking kind of the tried and true science-based ways that really bring happiness to people. And in this class, we're going to offer you really our own perspective, science-based. So we're going to really emphasize the power of social connection, the power of compassion, the power of cooperation and giving, the power of kind of a grateful mindset, the power of being mindfully accepting of the states that you experience, the power of focus and things like narrative and awe at the end. So we're really going to give you our own view, which really suggests that happiness really is about social connectedness and the greater good, which we talked about in our last discussion, as those powerful science-based ways of finding happiness. But really, the important point to take from this is there are many different dimensions to happiness, and in this class we're really going to be exploring all of them.